Welcome back. We're discussing the fate of Gordan Brown and Britain's Labour Party. From London, I'm joined by Labour Member of Parliament Jeremy Corbyn and Guardian columnist Jonathan Steele. Gentlemen, welcome back. Now, just before the break, we asked our chat room the following question. Is Gordan Brown's situation a result of his own policy failings, his personality, or a backlash against the new legacy of New Labour? Now, 47% of you felt it was the Prime Minister's own policy failings that put him in the situation. 12% of you said it was his personality, and 41% of you believe it's more to do with the backlash against the legacy of New Labour. Of course, the results aren't really scientific as such, but I wonder, Jonathan Steele, what you make of that. It seems 12%, the personality issue, which is often touted in the media, has less to do with it. But are you surprised 41%, certainly in our chat room poll, put the legacy of New Labour and the backlash against it as a reason for the situation Labour's in now?
No, I think that's quite understandable because, as we were saying, they've been in power 12 years. And so obviously they built up a legacy, and it hasn't been as impressive as many people expected. There was a poll recently that said that 63% of voters thought that the Labour Party used to represent their concerns and no longer feel that way. So there's been a real drop in support from May the 1st, 1997, when Tony Blair came in on a great landslide and everybody thought a kind of new dawn was breaking. And then in many ways he followed the policies of Margaret Thatcher, and there was this private-public partnership, there was the kowtowing to the city, there's the privatisation that Jeremy Corbyn mentioned, or the attempt to part privatise the Royal Mail. I mean, even Ronald Reagan and George Bush in the United States have never tried to privatise the US mail service. I mean, this kind of thing, people can't understand. How can a Labour government be doing these things? This is what Tories do.
An email came in, Jeremy Corbyn, an email came in from the United Kingdom from a viewer who by the name of Riz Khan, who wrote in saying, "Yesterday we saw the European elections with a disappointing result for my home area, where the British National Party gained 1 seat and 2 seats nationally. This only happened due to the terrible results of Labour. I think it is a wake-up call for the rest of us peace-seeking citizens who believe in plurality, multiculturalism and coexistence." Now, it's interesting. I mean, the BNP issue is one thing we can touch on, but America seems to have gone down the path of liberalism and elected even an African-American as a president, as a leader, while European countries have been swaying much more towards a sort of more hardline nationalistic approach in their election processes. Now, I wonder, as Assad points out in his email, with Britain having the BNP member, what's happening? Why is it that Europe and Britain seems to take this strong anti-immigrant tack, while on the other side of the Atlantic it seems to be going in a much more open-minded direction?
Well, the United States has got a long history of the battle for civil liberties, and having won those, it's also much more aware that migration to the United States is the very lifeblood of the US economic development. It's not very obvious always with the treatment of Mexicans and Guatemalans at the border. Whereas in Europe at the present time, we do have a conscious rise of the fascist right in most European countries, sadly particularly in Central Europe, in Hungary, for example, Austria and the Netherlands, which is on the Atlantic coast, obviously. There's been a big rise there. The BNP has won 2 seats in the European Parliament from Britain, not with any big increase in the vote. They've won it more because Labour supporters stayed home. And this is the question. Labour supporters, as Jonathan quite correctly points out, feel let down by their party. They didn't vote Labour to have draconian anti-terrorist laws that damage people's civil liberties. They didn't vote Labour to get public-private partnerships or privatisation. And I think one of the big turning points was actually the way that we were dragged into the Iraq War and all the dishonesty that accompanied that. That was, I think, a pretty fundamental turning point. The situation is not irretrievable for Labour, but it's got to reconnect very, very quickly with its grassroots working class support in order to hold on to the most of the constituencies it holds at the present time. The election, the general election, doesn't have to be held until a year's time from now, so there is some time ahead.
Anis is on the line from London. Anis, what would you like to add to the debate?
Yeah, my question is that, hello to the guests. What is the alternative to Brown? While David Cameron have no plan for economy and...
Okay, actually, let me ask Jonathan Steele this then. I mean, to what degree has David Cameron made the most of Gordan Brown's, certainly public demise in the media, and how have the Conservatives offered anything substantial as far as you can see?
Well, a lot of people are saying David Cameron wants Gordan Brown to stay in, so he will be pleased that Gordan Brown survived tonight's meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party in the House of Commons. The argument being that they think Brown is so hopeless now and so tarnished that there's no way he could ever win an election, whereas a new leader might do a little bit better, and so Cameron would prefer to have Brown as his opponent. But I think the other part of your caller's comment is correct, that people don't really know what David Cameron stands for. He's really quite glib, and he's very personable and seems like a sort of warm human being, whereas Brown can be a bit wooden and stern and so on. So personality-wise, Cameron is quite attractive, but people, as they get closer to an election, and I think now people will focus on it once this leadership issue in the Labour Party has been taken off the agenda, people will say, well, who is the next Prime Minister? Is it really going to be David Cameron? What does he stand for? What are his policies? He's done a number of U-turns. He seemed to be much more good on green issues, for example. Now he's changed his line on that. He seemed to be trying to understand people who were, you know, the so-called hoodies. He had a sort of phrase, hug a hoodie. You know, we've got to understand why these people are committing violence and are alienated and so on, these working class youth and so on. Now he's much more law and order and tough and on crime and so on. So he's had some U-turns, and already I think people will start looking more carefully at him, and that's what Labour obviously is hoping.
Well, Aisha's on the line from London. Aisha, what would you like to ask?
I just wanted to wonder, why do you think the BNP was elected, not just in regards to Labour voters not going out to vote, but are we actually addressing that there are actually racist people within England, and we still need to address that actual issue?
Thanks, Aisha. I'm going to ask that to Jonathan Steele, as Jeremy Corbyn obviously gave his perspective on the issue of turnout. But Jonathan Steele, do you see any other reason why the BNP has been able to show such, such force, so to speak?
Well, no. I mean, as Jeremy correctly pointed out, their actual numbers of votes haven't increased. It's just the share of the votes gone up because of the collapse in other parties voting and the general low turnout and so on. So all that is true. But they do seem to take their votes mainly from white working class people, who should be the natural bedrock of the Labour Party. This other party, which is also right-wing but not as right, the United Kingdom Independence Party, UKIP, they seem to take their votes more from the Conservatives. They're a different kind of sociological background. But it's true that I think Labour in some areas has not confronted racism properly. They in some ways have pandered to it and not dealt with the argument about the value that immigrants bring to this country, etc., properly. And so the BNP, in a sense, has had the tide going in their favour. They haven't been confronted. The hope now, of course, is that this will be a shock to the system, a shock to all the parties, that the BNP has done so well in terms of getting seats in the European Parliament, and that they will now confront them on that ground of immigration and asylum seekers and racism and so on.
Well, we have a question from our chat room here for Jeremy Corbyn, if I could put it to you, sir, from Russia. It's come from Kostya in Russia, who says, is it necessary to allow 350 Labour MPs a secret ballot on whether Gordan Brown should be allowed to continue as party leader or not?
No, I don't think it's necessary at all. I think the idea of a secret ballot amongst members of Parliament is really ridiculous. We ought to be able to stand up and say what we think and what we believe in. I don't like the idea of secret ballots for public representatives. I think there has to be transparency and there has to be accountability. The rules of the Labour Party are somewhat arcane on these matters, and it's not very clear quite what rules you do use to try and get rid of a leader if that's what you want to do. Tonight's meeting was a very lengthy, quite dramatic kind of affair. Possibly it is a turning point, and the government will start to reconnect, because a lot of MPs were pretty terrified at the election of two fascists to the European Parliament through the BNP. And what Jonathan says is correct. Labour in some areas has not really confronted racism. In London, where I'm one of the members of the Westminster Parliament, the BNP vote in my area was very, very low indeed. I live in and very proud to represent a very multicultural area. It's in less diverse communities generally the support for the racist and far-right parties is greater, but Labour has to confront it in a way that I think has not been sufficiently done before.
Jonathan Steele, literally 30 seconds to go. A quick thought, is Britain's position on the European platform jeopardised by everything that's been happening, the weakness of the British government?
Yes, I think it is, and also by the fact that the Conservative Party is no longer aligned, even indirectly, with the equivalents in France and Germany, the ruling parties, but is moving to join very right-wing parties in Poland and Hungary and so on. And so that also diminishes Britain's clout in Europe.
Well, gentlemen, lots of questions, never enough time. Jeremy Corbyn, Jonathan Steele, thank you very much both for your contributions. And thank you for being with us. On the next show, we look at the results of Lebanon's elections, where Western fears of a major Hezbollah victory didn't materialize, but the ruling of the country still remains a tricky balancing game. We'll talk with Hezbollah's media relations officer, Ibrahim Moussaoui, to find out what's next. That's it from me and the team in Washington, D.C. and London. We'll see you next time.